don't really remember dinners together. And I know that I lived at my grandparents' house, and like if I were hungry, we couldn't eat after dinner. And I don't know if that was because we were poor or if that was because of their beliefs around food. Um, and I remember like wanting something sweet, and I had like peanut butter and cocoa powder, and like just like dying and fainting for something more. Um, so those are sort of my developments around food, and not really having any sort of consistency. Like my mom never made my lunches or anything like that.
When did you transition from sort of dieting with your mom and eating whatever happened to be like around your mom to sort of having your own eating behaviors and like getting your own food, and like did you experience eating like your first eating disorders around that?
Um, well, I know I did fourth grade twice, so that blurs my memory. But I know at between fourth and fifth grade, um, I bought lunch at school, and I specifically remember, I think it was the first time that I decided to skip lunch. Um, so I think it was probably having the ability to buy my lunch at school, um, and my mom not ever checking. Like there was no. Um, I think my mom was just completely naive to the idea of eating disorder, and no one around me was looking for it. So that seemed pretty easy. Um, or I could get like a bag of chips instead of food, which I think in the beginning it was very much like that, like not eating a full meal, but eating a snack, a light snack instead. So probably fourth or fifth grade.
And then how did it progress?
Um, it probably stayed like that for a while. Um, and then I think by seventh grade, um, which was also the introduction of drugs, um, that it became, well, maybe even sooner, because I don't really remember eating breakfast. Like skipping breakfast and lunch, I think started to happen, and I don't really remember, but I know by seventh grade, um, once I had drugs or pills to suppress my appetite, and my mom worked late, um, and then got deployed. Um, so she really wasn't around to notice, and I think that that's kind of when I really um, could skip meals. And then also by that time, I was like doing silly diets, like only eating ice cream or only drinking Propel water and rice crackers. Um, and then that seemed to go on. And I don't really remember the first time that I started throwing up my food, but it um, might have been once I was in ninth grade, where I wouldn't eat for a long time. It was probably sooner than that, because my best friend's older sister was bulimic. Um, so it was probably sooner. But I think after starving for so long, and then would lead me to like binge eating, and then I would have this like guilt and be so ridiculously full. And so then it was, it felt like the obvious thing to just throw up. And probably because I knew that my friends were doing it. So then I started doing it. And then I know that during ninth grade, I'd come home on the bus, and that became my routine, where I wouldn't eat all day, or I would eat like a cookie at school, and then come home and binge on certain foods, and then throw up everything after school. And that seemed to be kind of regular. Um, and and then and then it got to the point where I couldn't eat without, I would throw up naturally. I wouldn't need to make myself. And I also mastered quietly throwing up, which I remember being in places where other people are around, and I figured out how to do that quietly. And then it wasn't until I got sober that my behavior started to alarm me. And I think it's because my perspective started to change about how I lived. And I think my mom maybe had an idea that I was, I don't know, I think that maybe she's always had sort of ideas that what I was getting into. And so she would like tell me threatening stories or crazy stories. I guess being in the medical field, she's seen a lot of crazy things. And I remember her like telling me about like my esophagus could get burned. And I knew all these horror stories about what bulimia could do. And so one day I thought that I saw blood in my throw up, and sorry, that's really graphic. But that really scared me. And so I told my mom while we were driving home, and I was crying and upset, and she got really mad at me and yelled at me and told me she would put me in in a treatment hospital if she ever found out. And I remember like her being mad at me for that. But then I also remember her coming with me to like this girls' sleepover thing. And she was trying to be really supportive around my, I guess, eating disorder recovery. It's only one memory that I have where she acknowledged it. And she came inside with me, and I remember talking to the parents, and there was like pizza and carrots, and I don't know, but I remember her like trying to be concerned and involved and like helping me through it. But that's the only memory I have around that. And then after that, it kind of became, I sought support through the girls in my recovery group. And it kind of became less about healing from eating disorder and more about being honest for like my sobriety, like from drugs. And then I kind of stopped thinking about it for a while and focused on getting sober. And then things kind of came back up a little bit later.
Could you tell me a little bit more about you talked about you were taking pills to suppress your appetite. Can you just describe what that was and how that progressed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know which pills came first. I just know that it seemed like anyone who was prescribed to antidepressants or Adderall never wanted them. And so I was getting an assortment of antidepressant pills and different types of Adderall type pills, and would take them, and and then I wouldn't be hungry, which was great because I didn't want to be eating, and so it just was like a natural progression because it really solved a lot of problems of being hungry. Yeah, and I just sort of always had always had people for some reason that were just like giving me, I was like the person that they would come to get rid of their pills. And I think I kind of had a reputation of, I was sort of the crazy one back then. Yeah, and I actually remember I got sober halfway through 10th grade and was at my high school, and someone was like, hey, I have some pills for you. And that was sort of my decision breaker to go to a different high school, which I went to a sober high school after that. So yeah, it was just kind of the normal thing to always have a collection of antidepressants and Adderall.
So you spoke a little bit about having bulimia, and when we spoke on the phone, you said you also experienced anorexia nervosa. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and when that came into the picture?
Um, yeah, I guess it just was a slow progression of skipping food as often as I could. Um, and I think also sort of between like seventh and ninth grade, it was easy to not eat because there wasn't much there was not, I sort of was kind of on my own, like at school all day, coming home alone, and then I would go be with my friends. So my mom and I wouldn't really see each other. And also, I think part of my eating disorder, although separate, was my using experience, because I would stay up all night, like sneak out with my friends, and I remember that staying up all night was part of how I would be like get skinnier. I don't really know how it works physiologically, but but I know that that over the weekends when I would do a lot of partying or drinking instead of eating, that I would feel a lot skinnier when I wasn't sleeping and drinking and doing drugs instead. Um, so yeah, food just, I just really had no focus on food, and it was much more about doing drugs and going out, and um, yeah, and I feel like I don't know, I don't really have, I mean, I know that I would eat sometimes, but I also never got really skinny. Like I know some people who are fit the like stereotype of what anorexia or bulimia looks like, and I think that's another reason why I could get away with it. And then on top of that, I played sports all through middle school, um, and yeah, I don't know. I think about what what my life was like, and I don't even know how my body could survive through that. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Let me fix that really quick.
Okay. Thanks.
What is the lowest weight that you ever got to?
Um, I don't know. Because I feel like I've always been really heavy. Um, and I also was never one to really pay attention to the scale, because it was more about how I looked. But I also know that when I would stay at my grandparents' house, they had a scale, and anytime I ate something, I would go weigh myself, and it would frustrate me. So honestly, I don't even have a number. I know that in these last couple of years that I've known what I've weighed, and I've gone between 170